Welcome, everybody, again to the Ascetus podcast, where we're continuing our series on Slavoj Zizek's Sublime Object of Ideology. This episode will be going over the second half of Chapter 1, again with our lovely friend and co-host, JuiceMoney. Welcome to the show again, Juice.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll just get started with this one. I mean, no sense in beating around the bush. I think people know why they're here. One of the important concepts to grasp in interacting with the world is cynical distance. Cynical distance is just one of the many ways which allow us to interact with a particular structure, with a particular ideological fantasy. Basically what it means is you sort of have an ironic distance from something, right? You could kind of think of it like being at a nightclub and you're kind of thinking, oh, this is so silly. Ha ha ha, look at everyone just standing around. We're just a bunch of monkeys drinking and dancing to the big boom boom music. But nonetheless, you're still at that club. You're still there, right? So despite your ironic distance, you kind of know what's going on. You're still participating. The reason I bring this up is if anyone who's listening is familiar with the Red Pill subreddit, it kind of goes to, it kind of demonstrates what whatever you'd want to call it, I guess the establishment there shills, for lack of a better term, right? So you have your Rollo Tomasis, your Ryan Stones, your Red Pill schools. And basically what they're offering you is to go from not knowing and doing it to knowing and doing it. So now, instead of unknowingly, quote unquote, enjoying the decline, now you know you're enjoying the decline and you're still doing all this degenerate shit. So are we better off? No. I mean, they basically bring their readers from a naivety to cynicism.
Yeah, and that naivety to cynicism shift is particularly dangerous. I don't know if that's the exact right word, especially in regards to the Red Pill and the different personalities and shills that occupy that space. There is a vast unknown to a lot of, especially young men, that all this stuff is brand new to them. Like, oh my gosh, I can enjoy the decline. Like, I can do the things that I see the alphas, quote unquote, are doing, and I can be that too. And even though I know this is this is not good, right? This is not life affirming. I can still I can know it and do it. But what that sets the stage for is you kind of see behind the veil, and this is an important distinction. Is there's not something covering. You're not removing the veil and seeing what's truly behind the veil. It's you're removing the veil to see that there's nothing back there, right? And that leads people to fall out of their fantasy, lose all hope and purpose, and end up in a depression, right? Which I think we can see a lot of in the Red Pill, especially over its kind of transformation the past 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we see trends where that fantasy falls apart more and more, right? I mean, think about just the historical revisionism that's going on in the West in general, right? Everything is being rewritten in this particular narrative rather than, us looking to the past and saying, okay, maybe that was kind of a dick move. Everything is just completely written off with none of the benefits. I mean, universities being renamed, statues being torn down and replaced with, I don't even know what. Are they even replacing it with anything, right? They're basically just whatever sort of fantasy base layer that people had that they relied on to sort of form their identities. They're just absolutely destroying that, right? You can imagine how back in the day, I hate to use the example of traditionalism, or like, on Twitter there's a lot of trad bros and a lot of like trad crap that it's basically just like rehashed liberalism. But anyway, the context I'm referring to is, you can imagine a great culture having a rich history, a rich mythology. You have statues, you have great celebrations dedicated to celebrating past victories and all this sort of stuff. And now, what do you have? Maybe the Super Bowl,
Right.
I mean, like, you have no skin in the game, right? Besides some vague consumer marketing demographic that a particular fan of a particular team falls into, right? Like, you don't really have, and some people might find some degree of community within that. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't at least some redeeming quality, right? I mean, I would rather have people getting together in person over something, even if it's, whatever, entertainment, than absolutely not getting together and not doing anything. It's better than nothing, but at the same time, it's sort of like the lesser of two evils, right? And this is kind of why we saw how the liberal establishment had a huge problem with Trump's campaign trail and all these Trump rallies, because all of a sudden this vigorous force was ignited again in, the predominantly white working class. So out of their opiate beer football stupor, all of a sudden they were excited again. They were reanimated. They had a reason to, they just had a certain vitality in them. And if you think about it, that's exactly what the establishment, the globalist establishment, does not want. It's the opposite of what they desire.
Nietzsche, in Twilight of the Idols, writes that hope is just a slimmer of hope is better than any happiness, right? Any state of happiness, right? So that idea that the white working middle class has any sort of hope, in this case it's Trump and draining the swamp, or making America great again, whatever it may be, that hope is extremely dangerous to the predominant liberal ideology. And it's important to note that every change in history, or every development, basically presents the opportunity to rewrite history. So that's why we saw this acceleration, where one side having this renewed hope in the future brought way to tearing down monuments, tearing down names, and the past, and what a lot of people in that middle class demographic find to be like the keystone of American life.
Yeah.
So it's just it's that hope that things could get better, or things will improve, that is particularly dangerous to the ruling establishment.
For sure. And I think we could see how there was a particularly interesting article I read that described how someone who identified themselves as extremely liberal, extremely what we would call, I guess, leftist, and how even they had to leave a very liberal institution because, for example, instead of covering stories about increasing homelessness, increasing overdoses, and what can we do, why isn't this being fixed, instead of these kinds of stories, which, frankly, I think are appropriate stories, right? If you have all these homeless people and you have all these very evident social problems, then let's, as a society, we should be fixing that, right? I think it only makes sense. But what ends up happening is this woman describes a process of how basically all these stories she wanted to write got poo-pooed by the establishment because it had to, where's the wokeness? Where is, are you going to bring on a racially diverse panel of guests? Or are you going to bring on, is there going to be LGBT representation in the people you're interviewing about the subject? And, probably not, right? And then, okay, too bad. You're going to run a story now, and this is true. I'm taking this from the article. Instead, they wanted to do a story about how Tagalog, the language, doesn't have the appropriate genderqueer terminology in it and how this is a problem. I don't know if anybody has read anything about the Philippines. I think they have better things to worry about. But anyways, this is the kind of things that are happening right now. So you could kind of see how this all, I'm sure this started beforehand, but if anybody remembers Occupy Wall Street, a lot of the people who were involved in that movement basically recall how the same thing happened, right? There was actually some sort of momentum, and there is now evidence that, your CIAs and your FBIs and whoever infiltrated those groups and basically injected this wokeness into it. Okay, hey, I get it. You have these great ideas, but you're a white guy. Why don't we let the Jewish woman speak? Why don't we let this black chick speak? Why don't we let this person speak? And then now, rather than actually taking action, you're just checking boxes. The same thing with what was that situation? I think it was was it in Seattle or was it in Portland?
Chaz.
They had that. Whole Chaz thing. If you looked that up, I know someone was posting on Reddit about what kind of things that they were doing in their meetings, and you're like, oh my God, like you already have, they gained some ground, clearly, like they were controlling like a large portion of a modern city, which, I guess in a tactical, if we're looking at this from a tactical perspective, fantastic. I don't know how you achieve that, but great, right? You have at least...
Why? It's wild. Yeah. Like literally had
That's
planned.
That's right. Like they had something in hand, and, we're going to spend 3 hours talking about how we can incorporate all the different voices. And if you look it up, it was literally, they had this crazy hierarchy where, it was basically divided into white, African, Asian, and then within each of those, there was further divisions. So if you were a certain kind of Asian, then you were at the bottom of the Asian list, and so on. So it's literally like, rather than actually taking action and doing something, this process gets bogged down in this literal, like, it's literally this weird check the box type of, I don't even know, right? But it clearly stifles progress.
It's dizzying.
Right? And that's... yeah, exactly. And you know what? It's one of those things. It kind of leads us to our next point here, where in the same way that a capitalist seeks surplus value, or the excess value produced by the labor of workers over the wages that they're paid, a Lacanian subject seeks surplus value enjoyment, which in Lacanian terms is the objet petit a, or relational enjoyment. So it's kind of interesting to me how that concept of the surplus enjoyment relates to that capitalist surplus value, right? And you can imagine how if the media establishment is set up in such a way that they just constantly keep feeding the people what they want. They keep feeding them new, whether it's an identity, whether it's a methodology of thinking or whatever, right? It's a product at the end of the day. So they just keep feeding people these mental products, and here we are, right? Now you fed people the appropriate products in the same way that people who are constantly plugged into the internet, in the same way that people who are in the metaverse can't really do anything in the real world. You're feeding these people with a methodology and an ideology that prevents them from doing anything to actually disrupt the order.
Absolutely. The Lacanian split subject is, I think, really important here, because we're made up of different signifiers, right? So that might be, different signifiers have had effects on our lives. So it could be your religion, your country you're born, a philosophy you might subscribe to, right? So all these different things have effect on your life and quilt together to make you who you are. But with capitalism specifically, we are bombarded with all these different signifiers, and they're usually in different forms of brands or things to consume, but there's no real meaning behind it. So I forget the guy's name, but he had a good theory on capitalism and schizophrenia. It's like all this schizophrenic, where all the signifiers kind of detach from each other, and you're just this mess and jumble of these different advertisements and brands and things that capitalist structure hopes that you identify with, and then throw it away, and then identify with something else and spend more money, right? So it's very like these identities are all over the place, and that's why with advertising you see like the Marlboro man, and you identify like, oh, I want to be that rough and tough cowboy with a cowboy hat, and like, I want to identify just to sell cigarettes, right? For nothing more than that. And what it leads to is no continuity. People don't have that identity or continuity of identity that causes some serious mental issues, to be honest. But the thing is, capitalism has to continually reinvent itself and get more exploitive as it progresses. I think a good example of this is, look what's going on just with like consumable media, right? You have cable TV that used for what, probably 70-ish years. You turn on the channel or the channel that you like, and you get some sort of programming that you don't really have a lot of control over, but everything was packaged together. You paid for your cable, whatever. But now all of these different media outlets are reinventing. Everyone has their own, like Paramount Plus, Netflix, Hulu, like all these different, Peacock, right? It had to reinvent itself, and now instead of paying, $50 a month for your cable, which is all you'll ever pay, you pay $9.99 here, $15.99 there, another $9.99 here, and you end up probably spending double or triple what you would in the past for ostensibly the same content. So it's that constant reinvention of itself is necessary to the capitalist ideology. And when things get really spicy, especially with ideology, and Zizek would argue that once people start identifying with that, it seems to be a shortcoming, but the shortcoming defines the ideology. And we talked about it a little bit last week. It's how that point of like slavery in the United States, right? It's like all men are created equal, except for the black and brown ones. That becomes the fundamental. It's almost the negation, but it's more of just a contradiction.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the process you just outlined, right, where capital has to reinvent itself, right? It doesn't, you could switch out that concept of capital with another concept, right? I mean, it's kind of the whole genesis of Ascetus as a whole, right? I mean, I'm sure many of our listeners would have picked up on us through GLO posting on the subreddit or what have you. You ended up here in some way, and that way is somehow connected to the Red Pill subreddit. But what happened there, right? I mean, I used to frequent it quite a bit. Sometimes the content was meh, sometimes it was pretty good, right? Like anything. But what ends up happening, right? What ends up happening in this capitalistic process, right? You could imagine the early internet. So let's talk like late 90s, early 2000s. Let's look at that era of media production on the internet, right? We could look at what was coming out at that time as a process of production. So we're talking, this would be like the golden age of the internet. We're talking your newgrounds.com, your eBombs World, your albino black sheep, your rotten.com, and all these websites that used to exist. I mean, Lord knows I spent so many hours of my youth on Newgrounds because it had everything, right? It was completely unrestricted. There was this huge creative spirit. It got me into making Flash animation and all this other stuff. You just want to participate in it, right? It had this vitality. It had this energy, this unrestricted creative spirit. And, a lot of us formed some good memories. And you talk to people who grew up with that kind of stuff, and they, it's kind of a universal that was a very special time because the internet is completely different now, right? And that's exactly what happens when capital enters the situation. Now, instead of having this completely unrestricted Wild West, anything can happen, you have fact checkers. You have notices on your posts on various social media. You have different websites just being taken down. For example, LiveLeak, where a lot of pretty crazy content was posted, but it's nonetheless it's stuff that's happening, right? And that's kind of the shutdown of LiveLeak for me was like, okay, that's basically the old internet is gone. And in the same way, right, you look at different subreddits. So the Red Pill, when it first started, it definitely had some kind of mojo about it. Or the Donald, it had some kind of there was something, you could feel the energy that was being imbued in the content. And then what happens? Oh, okay. Now on the Red Pill, for example, it's, you're not following decorum. You're not following decorum. You're not following the rules. That's not how we talk to each other here. Okay, but the being able to speak or respond to people in that particular way, as much as it might have hurt people's feelings, that's what made the space what the space is. And now you're not allowed to do that anymore. And look at what I haven't looked at the metrics, but I could guarantee you the people who are posting on the Red Pill are either posting really stagnant content, and they're not getting as much newer people or having the level of discourse that a alternative ideological apparatus should be having. Because as much as they deny their particular ideology, that's okay, whatever, guys, they could keep living in that little fantasy, but the point remains that capital subsumes these creative spaces and then just adds all these different rules to them.
Yeah, and those rules are self-serving of capital, right? Because it's these rules of censorship and decorum. It's so you don't alienate people that could potentially spend money there, right? But in that act, you're alienating what makes these spaces so great, right? It's a tough thing to contend with because you want to keep it fresh. You want to keep it open and this creative space. But when you put those rules in to protect capital, essentially, you destroy the very thing that made it worthwhile to begin with.
Yes, exactly. And you could even see that, in look at movies. Great. How many more superhero movies do we need? Can we get like an actual? Could we actually get like a good, like a good motion picture? Like it almost is. I don't want to say it's like offensive to the medium because film can be a very effective medium to convey all kinds of interesting stories and ideas, and the 8-year-old inside me is like, oh, cool, Spider-Man gets to meet the other Spider-Man, but wow, okay, really? Like, there's no other artistic ground to be covered. I mean, with the advances in technology and what have you, right? We could be telling these crazy stories, but again, the system is stagnant, right? It's that capital machine sees the money to be made on hot repetitive garbage.
Yep.
And out comes hot repetitive garbage. Right? I mean, it's in the same way that, the music industry has been in some senses is very much alive and has that creative spark still within it, but I would say it's definitely not being supported by the mainstream. I mean, that's an oddity, right? You'll see people who seemingly just break through and manage to sustain music careers on their own, but in the grand scheme of things, it's all still controlled by, I think it's like 3 major labels now. They're down to 3. I know there was some consolidation. And again, can you tell me one significant popular artist that's come out that's been like groundbreaking in some way? I mean, not really. It's all just, oh, cool. This is a slightly different shade of blue. Wow. Great. And then it just gets pumped in your face because they got all this money, right?
It's crazy. The superhero movies, I don't get it. I just don't. And it's why does it matter? It's like, why can't people just enjoy what they like? And there's some, I guess there's some truth behind that, but what it starts to boil down to is it feels exploitive, right? It feels like, hey, we know that they're going to lose their mind over Spider-Man 7, so we're going to make Spider-Man 7. It's almost like a guarantee for capital, so that you lose all that that creativity, and it just seems like that there's a relationship between quality of labor or output and how much capital is involved. Just like with music, right? I would say probably the heyday of modern music has probably started in what, maybe late 50s, early 60s, through probably like what, 1990 at the probably the latest, where the relationship between artists and capital and businessmen wasn't really established yet. Or it was, but it wasn't to the extent that it is now. And like you said, it's 3 major labels controlling, and they most likely all are controlled by the same people, right? Like Vanguard and BlackRock own like 70% of like every company, or I forget, it's like Coke and Pepsi are both, the majority shareholders are owned by like the same conglomerate. So it's like they're not even competing anymore. It's just they know that there's going to be Coke drinkers, they know there's going to be Pepsi drinkers, so let's basically fix the game so that we extract as much capital as we can out of that situation, regardless of what the output is.
For sure. And I think this also, I know the music part we could go on for days, but the excuse me, it points to a particular feature that we see in capitalist society where people sort of lose these superstitions. The perception is that we're free from religion, we're free of our old former chains or whatever you want to call them, and that we're rational. But funny thing that ended up happening is now, rather than having a belief system that we identify with the objects, the signifiers, the commodities, and now the commodities believe for us. I'll give you an example. How many Che Guevara shirt wearing young folks have read what Che Guevara says? Because if you have, you would know that you disagree with them probably on a lot of stuff.
Yep.
Just because that guy was pretty hardcore. Particularly with what he said about non-heterosexuals. I'll leave it at that. You could do your own research. But this is what I'm saying is, rather than actually being like, okay, and you study a particular subject or you're involved in a particular community, oh, cool, you bought the band t-shirt. I think actually band t-shirts are a perfect example because I know there was a lot of celebrities who ended up wearing, man, like all these old thrash metal bands and all these just older, weird, obscure bands, and it became like a cool celebrity thing to do. Okay, well, I'm sorry. Do you listen to Municipal Waste? Because I don't think you do, Chris Brown. I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say that you don't. You could prove me wrong, but again, it's the same thing, right? Where now I know the people in those kind of, call it extreme music communities, they were kind of butthurt about it. Like, okay, well, this is our signifier, and it's being cheapened by these celebrities, right? That are they're not even true fans. We're the true fans. Mm-hmm. We wore it before it was cool, right? It's the same sort of thing, right? It's just an easy way to identify someone because you've lost that sort of defined social structure that we would have had in the past that would have conveyed these definitions or these identifiers to those people.
That relationship between things is really interesting, right? And it seems to me that there's definitely that idea of like, I liked it before it was cool, right? And I translate that to I liked it before Capital got involved. Essentially, right? I liked it before it became this advertised mainstream thing, and again, you lose some of that spirit there. But what we have lost is relationships between people in a way, right? So I'm not saying let's go back to like feudal Europe, where we have kings and lords and princes and stuff, and there's this like complex relationships between people that are sustained through tradition in a way, through these different social gestures and different rules and stuff. And seemingly we've lost all that, and we all now interact as rational utilitarians for ourselves. Like we are. There's no relations between people. The things act for us, and I'll give you an example. I think it's really interesting that religion is sort of maligned. I say sort of, it is, and that's kind of a different argument altogether. But people will put their nose up at people who believe in God or whatever it may be, and then, like, less than a minute later, will go and change their Facebook profile picture to like the like standing with Black Lives Matter, or like making their profile picture all black, or whatever. It's essentially religious action between these entities, these things, Facebook or whatever. And to go even farther on that, so much stuff is shared on Facebook, like happy, sad, significant, insignificant. But the significant ones are interesting to me. Instead of, let's say, you create a status like, hey, my family member died, or something that's, serious. People react with different emojis, right? With the crying emoji, or a thumbs up, or a heart, or whatever it may be, right? And it's almost relieving the person of the duty to cry, right, or weep in sadness. It's the thing, the emoji is feeling for you. It relieves you of that duty to basically show emotion. And now in that, it's almost. It's a good it's almost Stalinist in a way. But Zizek, he wrote in this new psychological inferiority that we have, I can think about whatever I want. I can yield to the most dirty and obscene fantasies. And it does not matter because, whatever I'm thinking objectively, I'm praying. And what that means is that now that I don't have to have this complex relationship between people, that these things now, emote and think for us, we can all just be degenerate and talk about and look at Pornhub and, you know, smoking weed and doing nothing and watching Netflix. It's almost like this. We've become lazy because of it, and not lazy in the traditional capitalist sense, but lazy in the human sense.
Definitely. And I mean, I think that's another example of what you said there, would be canned laughter in TV shows, right? It's again one of those things where you come home from a long day of work and you put on your favorite television program. Oh, and they laugh for you too. You just get to sit there in pure enjoyment. You don't even have to exert the effort to laugh. The TV laughs for you, and it even tells you when to laugh.
Yes.
It's the ultimate, just, you know, it's almost like, it's just like an opiate of sorts, right? You're just kind of there.
Right.
You're just kind of relieved from your duty to even, you know, have your normal human response to a funny event or a funny joke.
Yeah, and especially with the canned laughter, it's commonly misconstrued to be, oh, well, they're telling you when to laugh. It's like, no. Next time you watch a show or whatever with canned laughter or that laugh track, try to see how many times you actually laugh with them, and it's going to be probably near zero. But at the end of the day, you'll leave and be like, oh, man, I had a really good time watching Friends or whatever it may be.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting phenomenon. I was just going to bring that up. If you look up Big Bang Theory without laugh track or Friends without laugh track, it really goes to show you how, like, not that funny those shows are. I mean, I respect the shit out of what Seinfeld did, because despite the network saying, no, we need to do this, this is what we do when we make a TV show, the Seinfeld crew was just like, no, every single laugh has to be a real laugh. If we don't get a laugh, we don't get a laugh. We didn't do our job.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And if you think about it, that's, you know, I know, you know, that you have the cultural impact of Friends or whatever, all these other shows, but despite what some people may say about Seinfeld, like, it's still, a lot of it still holds up for a lot of people. And I mean, even if you think about it in without the context of having people in the audience laughing, you could just look at Curb Your Enthusiasm. I mean, it could just be a particular, you know, I personally respond to a particular type of humor or something, but I've shown a lot of people clips from that show that make them laugh out loud, and there doesn't need to be any prompt to laugh, whether real or canned.
Oh, yes.
Right? Like, it's there's a lack of this genuineness in media and in our society, precisely because we have this object-oriented, commodity-oriented, you know, existence and belief system. So I think that's a good place to cap this one off.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Thanks again for coming on the show, Juice. Thank you for listening to us here at the Ascetus Podcast. The link to the Ascetus Telegram channel is below for those who want a steady stream of the material that inspires us to make these podcasts for you. If you'd like to go deeper on the topics discussed, you can click the link in the description below, and a member of the Ascetus team will get in touch with you about personalized, in-depth guidance about philosophy and fitness. We do our best to bring you the freshest content possible, and all we ask is that you like this video and share it with someone who would appreciate it. Until next time, Full Metal out.